of the things I hear a lot actually when I go to conferences like that, or when I talk to founders or investors, is how can I grow my company faster? How can I get my company to become more international? And especially, how do I do that as a European company? Because we have a pretty poor track record in Europe, and Europe in the wide sense, in Europe as being non-US essentially, of building these global winners. So what I'll do today is just share some thoughts, some ideas, and also some learnings from what I'm doing now with BlablaCar, expanding BlablaCar all over Europe and more. And also what I've seen before as a VC, working as a venture capitalist in London for a few years, seeing lots of companies trying to do it, doing it, failing at doing it, and learning a lot doing that. So, all right, so let me tell you a bit about BlablaCar first, and then I'll go into how to build your footprint. So essentially, the vision when we started BlablaCar was pretty simple. The vision was to build a new transport network based on empty seats in cars, which sounds a bit crazy, but if you think of the way people travel today, and especially if they do travel between cities in Europe, they tend to do one of the following things. They take the train, or they take a bus in some countries, like Turkey or Poland, or they take a low-cost airline, or sometimes they take their own car. But one of the things we've been sort of neglecting all along is that the biggest passenger capacity we have, and the biggest seat capacity we have for transport, is actually not in trains, not in planes, not in buses, it's actually in cars. So what we did is we thought if we could just unlock actually a fraction of that seat inventory and make it available for passengers traveling the same way, we would actually not only build a massive transport network, we would actually build a very efficient, very low cost, and very sustainable transport network. So that's what we went on and built with BlablaCar, which is basically a marketplace between drivers and passengers, where drivers go in, offer the empty seats, driving from one city to another, and passengers go on the website, very much like they would go on a train website or a plane website, and they book that seat. So essentially what we do is we have drivers offering seats and passengers booking seats. So we started that a few years ago. We expanded that all over Europe, in pretty much all countries in Europe. And today I'm happy to say we carry actually 1 million travelers every month actually on that network. So it's really become like a very significant transport network, which, by the way, is bigger than the Eurostar. So today, very quickly, we get to a point where more people travel in a BlablaCar in Europe than travel by Eurostar. And we've also built that by creating like a very, very large community of members. And today we have 5 million members in Europe signed up to BlablaCar and using the service. And as you can see on this curve, actually, things are not decelerating, things are accelerating. And the main reason we can get from 5 million to probably 10 million pretty quickly is that we went international pretty quickly. So to tell you a bit on how we've done that, I'll go back to my venture capital days in London. And I ended up in venture capital in 2007 after actually 7 or 8 years in Silicon Valley. So I was a bit sort of formatted by Silicon Valley startups and what you talked about in the Bay Area. And I came in Europe thinking, okay, it's going to be simple. I'll just need to find and finance the next Google or eBay or Amazon of Europe. And very quickly I realized that A, it was pretty damn hard, and B, we had no track record in Europe of actually doing that. Right, so we've never built like a really global, or rarely built very global companies. So I started to think of that and try to understand why was that, and what was the problem in Europe. And what I've done is I started by looking at all the successful internet companies, and I'm probably missing a few here, in Europe. And I started to look at how these companies operated and what they've done. And by the way, the notion of success here was looking at all the companies that have been worth more than $150 million through either an M&A or an IPO or some big fundraising. And then I looked at how many of these companies actually won only in a single market. And I called these guys the single country winners. And what you see here is that actually in Europe, we're pretty good at building these single country winners, so like the hero for Germany, hero for France, hero for Turkey, or whatever country. But actually, we're not that good at building the global winners. There are very few companies, most of them in the Nordics, by the way, and I'm probably missing a few, but very few companies you would call the gorilla in the space from Europe. So I wanted to understand why, and what I've done is I looked at all these companies, sometimes talked to the CEOs and talked to the founders and looked at the history of funding of the companies. And most of the time, and one of the things you hear a lot in Europe is that the reason we don't build the gorillas is that we don't have the funding. And it's partially true, but I would argue it's not the main reason. And today, I mean, you can go get the funding in the US if you want to. It's possible. You can get US investors from Europe. So I look more closely at the what I call the single country winners. So these companies that actually have done very well, but they've done very well in a single market. And if you look at the way they operate, they tend to do the following, which is actually quite logical and pretty rational. They start the company in their home country, then they go through this phase of proving. So proving could mean different things. It could mean getting your first customers, getting traffic, getting downloads, getting usage, whatever. You should know as your company what proving means. But essentially you prove that there is something there. And then they go through a phase of monetizing, making revenue, and then they end up slowing down at some point. And that's typically at that phase that most of these companies think, shit, I'm slowing down. I need to find some growth. I need to diversify or go international. And that's typically when things go wrong, actually, for most of the single country winners that don't go beyond a single country, is that they fail actually going international, because typically they do it too late. And the funny thing is if you do that for a US company, it tends to work actually. So the paradigm actually works for US companies because by the time you get to revenue as a US company, you're typically going to be 5 or 10 times bigger than any of your competitors in Europe. So you can just enter by acquiring a company in Germany and competing with another one in France and buying the third one in the UK, and you end up being the global leader. And it doesn't work in Europe for several reasons. It doesn't work because you end up having competitors of the same size in your neighboring markets, right? So you end up with like a French company that's more or less the same size of a German company, that's the same size of a UK company. And a great example of that, I think we have quite a few people from the UK here. I think everybody knows rightmove.com in the UK as a website. And that's a website where you would go and to buy a house or rent a flat. No one has ever heard of rightmove.com in France, Germany, or the rest of Europe, actually. Yet, I think the company is worth somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion. So it's a very successful company in a single market. In France, there is a company called SoLoger. SoLoger is doing exactly the same thing, worth about the same. No one has ever heard of SoLoger in Germany or UK or any other country. In Germany, it's called Immobilien. So if you think of, especially for the internet, if one of these companies had scaled all over Europe pretty quickly, it would probably be today like a $5 to $10 billion company, actually. It would be acquiring startups, it would be investing in the ecosystem, it would be expanding abroad. But today it's not the case. We've just built this collection of single country winners. So then I looked at the global winners, the very few global winners. Lots of them actually come from the Nordics. So you see some from Finland or Sweden. And I found actually 4 things actually that they tend to do really well, and that some US companies tend to do really well to win big. So the first thing is invest in your geographical footprint very, very early. And essentially that's the big mistake we tend to do in Europe, especially for internet services, is to focus too long on the home market, especially when the home market is called UK, France, or Germany, because it's kind of big enough, you feel comfortable, you built your service, and by the time you want to expand, it's too late. So if you want to become the gorilla in the space, actually, you need to expand your footprint very early on. And typically when it's not comfortable, when your investors don't tell you to, when your board doesn't tell you to, but you need to go there, essentially, because otherwise it tends to be too late. The other thing, typically when I say that and when I talk to entrepreneurs, they always say, yeah, but it's complicated because Europe is fragmented and it's a collection of markets. And the reality is it's not that complicated. I mean, today in Europe, I mean, you can work in every country in Europe if you're European. It's pretty simple to set up very, very light structures. M&A is actually not that complicated. So most companies think that M&A is a game for big companies. Actually, at our scale, we already acquired 3 companies, and every time very small companies, and that's how we expanded geographically. So it's possible. You need to get good advice, but it doesn't need to be expensive or complicated, or you don't need an army of lawyers to do that. Build local teams. And something that's one thing I've seen in almost all the successful companies, again, lots of them from the Nordics, very quickly they have a team in Germany, they have a team in the UK, they have a team in the US. And especially for consumer internet, you cannot win without a local team. There is no way you're going to launch UK from Munich or Germany from Paris. It just doesn't work. And finally, create a unified brand. So essentially create a brand that's going to work in all the countries, not just yours, because otherwise it's going to bite your ass a few years down the road when your name doesn't make sense in every country. So again, lots of good examples in the Nordics. Now I'll tell you actually how we map that into the history of BlablaCar. So BlablaCar, essentially the real commercial start of the company was 2009. And back then, life was pretty simple. We had one employee, one office, one market. And what I call the footprint was our own market, France, with 65 million people. And to your point earlier, I mean, at that time, we had a use case, but the business model was not proven. 2010, actually, the business model was still not proven. We were making no revenue in the company. We got the first round of financing of 1.2 million euro, and we started to expand in Spain. And at that time, people thought it was a bit crazy because we had not proven much, actually. We had a very small team. Business model was not proven. We had no revenue, and yet we were expanding already with another office in Madrid. Then we did that again with the UK in 2011 when we were just trying to monetize the service. Then 2012, we started to monetize the service, and we also got some fundraising from Accel Partners, which is a US VC that's also in London. And at that time, we had 30 people, 5 offices, 7 markets. So essentially, if you think of it, it's for a 30-people company, having 5 offices around Europe is a bit crazy, right? But that was the only way we could actually do that. And at that time, we had done 3 acquisitions. One in France, one in Italy to launch Italy, one in Poland. And every time it was like very lightweight acquisitions just to acquire a team, essentially, and get the market launched. Then we launched Germany, and today, so I don't have like an updated figures, but essentially today we have 100 people, 7 offices, and 12 markets. And our footprint in terms of population, so the playground we play with for BlablaCar, is actually as big as the US or bigger than the US. So certainly if we win all these markets, we're building something that's significant in size and in revenue. So I'll finish with a graph, which is sort of the history of BlablaCar. And what we track, I mean, the key KPI for us is to track the number of seats offered by the community. So it's to see like how many seats are offered by the driver so that the passengers can book the seats. So we think like a transport company. So if you look at the history of France, so as the first market we launched, so we started pretty much at 0, and we ended up, last month we had 1.5 million seats offered by the community just in France. So if you see that curve, actually, it's good enough to excite actually most investors because we're still growing pretty fast, we don't see any slowdown. But what we decided to do is to launch new markets very early on. And the main point is, so just adding up all the different markets we launched, and today, actually, we have 42% of our inventory that's outside of France and growing like 400% or 500% year on year, essentially. But the reality is it took, that's the big lesson, it took us like 2 years actually to put that in place. So essentially, we took that decision to go and scale at a European level about 2 years ago. It took us 6 months to convince a big VC actually to join and come on board. And then it took another 1.5 years actually to see the result, right? And today we are at that scale where we've done like 10 times growth in the last 2 years, and we can see that the other countries are going to carry the growth of BlablaCar for the next few years to come. So essentially, invest in your footprint early. Thanks.